Hi, welcome to our latest webinar on leadership insights, and we have a fantastic show for you today. I think you'll get a lot out of it, and it is live, and the reason we only do live is so that you can interact with us. So we really encourage you to interact with us. I think everyone knows how to do this by now. You'll see on your screen the ability to ask questions. I will moderate those questions, so please feel free if we don't answer a question that you want to heard asked, please put it in there, or if you want some clarification on something, please put it in there. My name is Ed, and I serve as the Chief Digital Officer for the HCI Group, part of the Tech Mahindra family of companies. And excited, as I mentioned, about today's webinar. We have two guests, one of which is going to actually help me ask questions of our primary guests. So we have, they'll introduce themselves, but Chris Belmont is an amazing CIO colleague of all of ours, and he'll introduce himself and then pass it to Russ, who's the CEO of Chime and a longtime CIO as well as other things, and a military officer. So with that, let me hand over the stage to Chris for that introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I appreciate it. I work with Ed at the HCI Group as well, responsible for strategy and operations. I'm really looking forward to hearing this give and take, this conversation. Even in the prep, I learned a lot. So we'll learn more today. So Russ, over to you.
Appreciate it. Two dear friends, Ed and Chris, thanks for having me today. It's an absolute pleasure. We probably know a little too much about each other, so we have to be a little careful here. There's probably pictures somewhere out there, but I have the privilege of serving as the CEO and president of Chime, the College of Healthcare Information Management Executives. Quite a mouthful there. That's why we call it Chime, which is a professional association for chief information officers and other health IT executives. And we're now in probably just under 60 countries around the world. And as you can expect, trying times for everybody across the globe. But most importantly, what we've been able to do is spend a lot of time talking to our leaders, both in our foundation firms, which some would call vendors, as well as our provider members around the globe, and have really seen both the worst of times for their organizations, but the best of times in leadership. So great opportunity to share some thoughts today.
Awesome. So we're going to jump right in. This is not about COVID leadership, but it is about post-COVID leadership. But before we get there, as sort of a framing, we want to talk about what will the COVID legacy be? You know, as we think about leadership and what's going on, where are we headed? We're really battling on multiple fronts. And I think with that, Russ, I would love to get your thoughts about where are we headed and what will that legacy be and what's required of leadership in that time frame.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could pull that next slide up, because I think one of the things that we're starting to see is there's this concept that we're going to shift from one curve immediately to the second curve, or even a transitional phase in between. And we're starting to hear from some of our leaders across the globe that are a little bit farther ahead of us and really, in some cases, exiting out of the first curve here, which is obviously the most critical to ramp up and take care of our COVID patients. That this isn't a simple two-curve process, that our leaders are going to have to lead from a long-term impact of this, at least through the three primary curve waves that we're hearing about. And we were specifically talking to some of our CIOs in Italy, in particular one in Bergamo, which if you remember any of the stories of when Italy really was impacted the most from this, that was kind of ground zero in northern Italy in the mountains. And they basically were overwhelmed in a matter of days up in northern Italy, in this facility in particular. And what they're really seeing is, yes, you're seeing COVID come down, but what you're also seeing is the rest of the world is ramping up. And it's really, as much as we were stretched, doesn't matter what your role in an organization, as much as you were stretched from the leadership to ramp up. And part of that was a warfighting mentality, a leadership drilled by or driven by adrenaline. These next waves are going to be really taxing the systems, which is, I may need to keep my COVID response up while I start to get back to some of the traditional functions within a facility: ambulatory care, surgeries, traditional inpatients, traumas, all the things that we know got put on hold for the most part in most of our facilities. But that at the exact same time, we leaped forward so much in a leadership perspective the things we've been talking about in our 3.0 model for years, this next revolution of leadership and digital health, that all of a sudden now I have to normalize virtual care. I need to normalize as part of our traditional operations telemedicine and working from home and remotely that we did kind of through the causation of COVID. Now it needs to become normal operations. So I'm going to have to work on 2, 3, maybe 4 military terms here, battlefronts at the same time. So the legacy of leadership is going to be, yes, how we reacted to the original threat, but also how we led an organization through really a fundamental change in the way healthcare was delivered and will be delivered in the future. I have not heard one healthcare IT leader anywhere on the planet tell us they think they're going back to the way things were. That all of them believe our job now is to help organizations fast grow, mature, and change, and take the stuff we've already done and make it normal.
You know, Russ, everything you said is spot on, but with the pressure CIOs have been under leading up to this event, and with the surprise of this event, how do you think CIOs have responded overall? And then is there anything else they could have done to prepare better?
Yeah, it's always easy to play Monday morning quarterback on this by far. I will say I've been quite impressed with the step up that people have done. And again, I obviously this is probably a traditional and mostly American audience that's on here, but we've had the chance to talk to people around the world. And some that I would even have said probably are many years behind the traditional adoption and maturity of not only the organizations, but the leaders in some of our more developed countries. What I've seen across the board is the reaction has been unbelievably swift, and the leadership skills they showed in probably some of the most trying opportunities or experiences they've ever had to experience. And I had one CIO said, and they were a Florida CIO, said, I went through the last major hurricane, Irma. Every day I wake up and I get a new Irma. That's the world I live in every day. And this was a pretty mature CIO, been around for a while. And he basically said, I wasn't ready for that pace of repetitive stress. And I think if there's one thing we've done is healthcare's been a pretty slow, methodical, maturing industry. Some would say way too slow. What's occurred now is we've done 3 to 5 years worth of digital work in 3 to 5 weeks. And that pace is really unsustainable, except that we might have to sustain it for a while. So I think if anything, it's more the behavioral, relational, mental side of this that's probably pushed people over. The skills were always there and the technology was there. Think about EHRs, what would have happened if we would not put those in over the last 3 to 5 years.
That's great. You know, Russ, you've spoken, you know, Chime has talked a lot about it, and certainly in the boot camps, about CIOs, and we called it, we talked about the evolution, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And like you're describing, I think many who may have been 2.0 were sort of forced and became 3.0 through this experience. And what do you think is next in terms of that continued evolution of growth? What would you say to CIOs to keep learning? What should they keep focusing on to continue on that growth line? Because as that graph showed, the pace is not going to slow down much. There's multiple fronts. Our leadership quotients are going to have to get even higher. So what are some areas that in terms of a 3.0 leader that we might want to focus on?
Yeah, if you think about this, there's probably 2 significant phases to this. There's one, what I would call the short term, which doesn't seem so short term anymore as fast as reacting. And that's probably the next 12 to 18 months in helping their organizations, mostly economically, but also operationally get back to normal. And that is not just a traditional IT role. It's also just a pure operations of helping your organization, leading from the front and helping these organizations get back to a place. And I don't necessarily get back to, meaning an old normal, but get back to a pace of new normal where they can grow and mature back to where they were economically to some degree. The other part of this is there has never been a time, I don't want to say necessarily an opportunistic, meaning it's a positive thing that we're here, but it is here. And if you think about the very premise of what we've described as a 3.0 leader being the ones that help an organization change, grow, mature, and transform. Probably the biggest word being transform there. Now there's the opportunity to say, okay, we did 3 to 5 years worth of work, probably in 3 to 5 weeks. Now, how do we continue that process? How do we continue to look for ways to change the model? What's interesting is that when you think about it, we've done everything we said we thought was going to happen. Get people working out of their homes, health in their homes, physicians working remotely, clinicians working in different ways, telemedicine, telecare, empower the patient. All that has happened overnight. We didn't think it would. Now we've got to help the organizations grow and mature. And I think it's not just the HIT leader. I think it's all the C-suite now. It's going to have to change their game to a 3.0, meaning whatever that is in their organization. But it really is to change the industry and the way we deliver. We've been looking for the catalyst to improve quality, improve safety, and reduce costs for years. Now, all of a sudden, we've got a kind of a little bit of a reset button here to give us that opportunity to lead from that perspective.
Yeah, that reset button is challenging. In a lot of ways, we've been talking about a lot of this transformation for years. And, you know, there'll be certain organizations that will use this to accelerate that transformation. Others will sort of rethink the norm and how much do you go back to. You know, the big challenge too is you have this financial impact as well. So organizations are hemorrhaging cash and burning through their reserves and into their reserves. At the same time, now you're trying to introduce another level of transformation. So I would assume that on that CIO maturity or evolution scale, there's going to be much more of a business focus too on what do we do, what do we stop doing. So it's that start, stop, continue discussion you got to have, and that leadership to step up and say, you know, maybe it's time we pump the brakes on some of this legacy stuff and participate at that level and making some of those tough decisions. Do you see the CIOs ready for that, or is that going to be a stretch?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was talking to a CIO the other day about this, and I asked him, I said, well, considering the financial situation, do you see investments in the workload decreasing just out of economic necessity? And this person said, absolutely not. Matter of fact, our team is talking about all the things we need to do over the next 18 to 24 months. But their mindset is changing a little bit. And now the question is, with really detailed analysis, what are the value-based things we have to do, whether it be a financial investment, whether it be brick or mortar to a full AI platform in the future, whatever in between that might be, there is a really strict thought process of value-based decision-making to help the organization reduce cost, improve revenue again, whatever the case may be. But again, those are things now, I wouldn't say we were undisciplined in it, but I don't think it was the sharpest edge we could have had in the past. A lot of times it was a bright, shiny object or something that somebody came back from a conference and said, I saw this was really cool. I think almost all decision-making going forward will be extremely put under the microscope and looked at from a value base improving the organization. I think most of our leaders have always wanted to do that and didn't want all the over-the-wall projects. And actually, I think most will actually welcome and embrace that. Some will have to improve their skills in that decision-making process. So.
That's good. So again, a reminder, feel free to go ahead and ask questions, enter those, and we'll be happy to take those as we go along. So I see some questions there already, and we will be looking at those. Russ, when we talk about, I don't want to get caught up in the number of 3.0, 4.0, and those sorts of things, but I'm just curious about your thoughts around the emergence of the chief digital officer. So in some organizations, the CIO is the CDO. In some organizations, a CDO has been brought from the outside with CIOs reporting to them. So what do you think about the future in terms of the direction of the CIO and that continued evolution, you know, post-COVID in terms of leadership?
Yeah, we have seen quite a few new roles, and this isn't like happened in the last couple of years. This has been happening probably for almost a decade now. And I think part of that is the maturity of HIT/digital in every organization anyway. Healthcare is becoming more of a digital environment, therefore needing more hands on deck to help lead this. And so we've got chief innovation officers, chief health information officers, chief digital, and on and on and on. What we're seeing is some of the leaders are maturing into those roles from the traditional CIO into a broader scope leadership responsibility at the strategic level. We've seen some that's not necessarily the case, and the organization looks and says, I need somebody that's looking at all of this, maybe from a clinical perspective, at least an organizational perspective. And what they're wanting is that broad scope leadership that's there. Again, that's true in every organization. And a little bit of picking on all the C-suite, as I mentioned before, spent some time with some CEO leaders across a pretty large spectrum of health systems across the country. And I asked the question, how many of you really believe you have that high level HIT leader that can help you drive strategy and transformation moving forward? And at the time, not many hands went up. But then I really challenged them. I said, how many of you have a CFO leader that can help you do that at that level too? And not many hands went up. And I said, how many have a CMO leader? And they said, not many hands went up. And then I really put them on the spot and said, how many of you have a CEO leader that's ready to lead at that level? And most of them said, no, we're not ready either. And I think that's really a testament to the industry right now and what just occurred and what needs to occur forward. We all have to up our game. And we all have to up our game to really get where we need to. What is Chief Digital Officer? That's one thing we have discovered recently, is that it's different in almost every organization. They're trying to fill a need in the organization, create transformation, and move them into a new environment. And a lot of times that might have been in the past the Chief Strategy Officer or some other title that's there. I have great confidence that our overall membership, which includes quite a few Chief Digital Officers, will continue to grow and help organizations mature and meet their mission needs.
Yeah, those are great points and significant challenges as we continue to grow. You know, if we now shift a little bit and think about how we service our communities and our populations and our customers, whatever you want to call it. And I noticed this after a couple of my situations with hurricanes, is that things tend to happen quickly and we forget about a lot of the, I don't want to say forget about the regulatory, but you tend to accelerate these things. So for example, after Hurricane Katrina, you know, when we realized that our population was dispersed around the country, we quickly were able to gather information, maybe not in a high-tech way, but we were able to, you know, build Katrina Health very quickly. But yet here we are 10 or 12 years later, and we still don't have great interoperability standards. So do you feel that this, you know, this incident or this episode, or maybe we look at it as this opportunity, will accelerate things like interoperability and the ability to share information? You know, you talked about tracing, how important tracing would be in tracking a situation like this, not only now, but going forward. You know, do you see us challenging some of these regulatory things and maybe looking at them less as a threat and more of as a benefit?
Well, it's interesting. You use the most recent example of regulations coming out with the requirement for what you would have thought would have been something fairly simple years ago, and that's simple ADT notifications and transfers and the process of getting ADT appropriately out to all the right care people that are there. And talking to some of the senior leadership in the government, they're like, could you imagine if we had that simple today, how well that would have aided us in this process? So you bring up an amazing point at the beginning of this, is why could we do so many things so fast now? One, we needed to. Two, the obstacles were immediately removed. And three, we didn't have a choice. I mean, it goes back, that's almost like it's needed. But the reality is this was pure necessity that's there. And one of the things that we've been talking with some folks, oh, I'm sorry about that. Didn't even know that rang. And
call from Action.
So
that was the interoperability group saying, don't say it.
That's why
sorry
we
about
love
that.
That was the interoperability group saying, do not push interoperability.
This is what happens when you don't even live in this house normally. So, I don't remember where we were with all of this.
No,
we were talking
good.
about yeah. Go ahead, Ed.
Chris, yeah, we've got
Oh, okay.
several questions that came in, and one of them is on this topic, which is interoperability.
Oh,
And
excellent.
so we're gonna refocus. You did answer the question, but I'm going to spin it in a different direction. So, and you may have touched on this a little bit earlier, Russ, but it's really that question: how do you balance? And you talked about the 4 different battlefields.
Right.
Okay, we got cybersecurity. That's our number 1 priority. Wait, that's no longer number 1. It's growth. Wait, it's patience. Wait, it's interoperability, enhanced analytics. How do you go about prioritizing all those different fronts, if you will?
You know, that's interesting, because talking to our friends in Bergamo in Italy about this, I said, how are you going to handle this? Because they see it coming. I mean, they're right on the edge of having to deal with all of this. And their answer was, we don't know, because we know we don't have enough resources to handle all of these. And we're going to need the assistance of the entire leadership part of this. But one of the things they said that I think was very eye-opening for me was they had to create a mind change, or at least a mindset change, in how they saw their vendor partners. In the past, they saw them as suppliers, and you provided a software package or a technology package, those kinds of things. But the reality was that what we really saw was that they needed as much help as they can, and their foundation or vendor partners were able to rally around them and help them during this period of time. They don't have enough resources. And I don't think most of our at least significantly impacted organizations, as they try to transition, are going to have enough resources, not just IT, any kind of resources in their organizations. And they're going to have to look at things much different than they can. Strategic leaders are going to have to step back a little bit and look at the entire field out in front of them, and have to figure this out in ways that they never have before. As challenging as Curve 1 was, all indication is this combination of still fighting Curve 1 with 2, 3, and if you really think about the long-term impact on individuals, both economically, behaviorally, emotionally, we're gonna have to think about a lot of things. And we saw some really horrific examples of that, of what occurred just recently with some suicides in this. We're gonna have to think about this from a human impact place like we've never had to before.
Agreed.
No, that's good. Chris, I'm going to run down these questions. We're going to do like my friend Bill Russell, who's awesome. I think everyone knows him. He does a great job. He does this rapid fire round, because I want to make sure we answer people's questions. So I'll have to limit you, Russ, to 30 seconds. But here's one, and that is, look, there needs to be a lot of innovation now, and a lot of it's happening because of COVID. What are 3 things, top of mind, 3 things that CIOs should really focus on in terms of innovation, things they didn't have before that they need to have now?
So right now, I would say the number 1 thing they need to focus on is taking care of their people, because without their people at this point, they are not going to be able to do anything moving forward. And I think that's probably one of the biggest stressors. The other is to examine what they've done over the last short period of time, to do take a few steps back, do some strategic analysis, and what really worked well as you put in virtual care and telemedicine, all the things that are there. And then the other part of this is a time for team. And this is where I think you can rally the entire senior leadership, actually all the leadership within an organization, and actually enable all of them to be part of the longer term solution and figure out what's going on.
So related to that, again, 30 seconds or less. One is, let me preface this by saying, our good friend Kathy, she reminds us the patient always at the center, and she's absolutely right. That's why we're in this business. So thank you for that reminder, Kathy. And so how much time, and again, this is hard, and I know it's situationally dependent, but it's going to be that, again, the multiple battlefronts is like, okay, we got to do a lot in virtual care. That's what you just mentioned, telehealth, remote patient monitoring, those sort of things. And then we still have internal operations, like I mentioned, cybersecurity. So I know there's not a magic answer to this, Russ, but just top of mind, what other things can you do? What are maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 techniques that you might offer someone to say, if they're struggling with that, is how do you help them prioritize?
And I don't even know if it's possible to prioritize. The answer is you're going to have to do everything. The question is, how can you do everything? And I think even more than ever, The people inside our facilities, the people that are on the battlefront, are also the patients in this case. It's not like in other environments that we've worked in the past, hurricanes or military conflicts or all the things we've also rallied around. In this case, it is the entire community. And I think there's an opportunity to empower a lot of volunteerism like we've never seen before, get them engaged in ways they haven't. Also look for family members during this time that are willing to help and volunteer to help in that process. I just don't know how you could prioritize one over the other, because you're right, patient care has to work, but more than ever, the person in the home's a patient as well, like we've never seen before, and probably haven't quite figured it all out yet.
So I'll have a quick comment on that, but Chris, you'll have the last question here in a second. And then we'll wrap up. We have 1 minute at the very end, just to talk about what's next. So the comment is, and Russ, I thought that you might mention this, but call your peers. So Chime is a great forum to have peer-to-peer interactions. I know I've been, that's my go-to. That's my quick call a friend, your fellow CIOs. Reach out like, hey, I don't know what I should do. You know, what would you do? Because every situation is different. There's no textbook answer. So leverage that Chime. So Chris, last question to you for Russ.
You know, Russ, how do you trigger this change in the team as well? Because the work habits are going to change and so on. I think that's going to be one of the challenges for the CIO. But also he or she is going to be challenged to change their behaviors as well. Do you have any, you know, when this is over, what is the first thing they should do coming out of the gate when this is all over? Probably come up for air for them. Yeah.
The simple answer is I should follow up Ed and say do something with Chime, but I don't think that is the case. And this is probably going to be the non-typical answer. And what I'm most concerned about right now is burnout. And I think that is true for everyone, nurses, doctors, administrators, whatever the case may be. I do think people are going to have to take a small moment to get themselves back in a great mental, spiritual, physical space. Most of us have added on at least the COVID-19 pounds on us as we've been sitting at home. Probably not Ed, because he's a great runner. But I think more than ever, we've got to figure out how to take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. But I think then it's time to do some really deep analysis and thought. And that takes a little bit of time to step back and actually kind of re-review where we are, why we're there, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then put your next plan together. We joke at boot camp, Ed and I have been teaching them for years, these 30, 60, 90-day plans. We talk about it, and then in the end we say it really isn't a 30, 60, 90-day plan. It's just this continual process of reevaluating, and making adjustments. But I think the last part of that will be it's time to engage the entire team in a relational model that really works and engages everybody, including the patients.
Yeah, very good.
All right, well, very informative. Russ, thank you for sharing. And Chris and I didn't talk about this beforehand, but Russ as well. I don't want to speak for all of us, but I'm going to. We appreciate what the CIOs have been doing. We're not in the front lines anymore. We're definitely back there supporting. But we appreciate you. We appreciate the amazing, beyond my thoughts ever, the job that you all have done. Chris and I are always available to you. You just call us up. This is another volunteerism Chris and I did talk about, but obviously you got Chime. We're part of Chime. But if you just need to talk to someone or ask them a question, it's not a sales thing. It's just call us. You know how to look up on LinkedIn. We're happy to help. Russ, like I said, as always, full of insight, wisdom. You've got this global view because of the 60 countries that we're in, and you've been doing this for a long time now, just listening to CIOs from around the world and CEOs. Thank you. One last minute, we've got some things coming up that you might want to know about. We are commercial free. I'm just telling you some upcoming webinars. We have another talk with Russ coming back with my former boss, Toby Cosgrove. So excited about that discussion as well. And then we are in our virtual care series. We have Dr. Dave Chotsky. He's awesome. He's in New York City Health and Hospitals. I used to work with him. He's in the ground, at the ground zero. So if you want to know what's going on, that's going to be a fabulous conversation. And then we have another webinar coming on. I think it's the next slide. I don't think it shows the details, but we're going to unveil sort of that platform, virtual care platform, one single enterprise platform. instead of being, different modules, it's one platform. We're going to unveil that. That's coming up to the great unveil in May. So thank you again for joining us, and Russ and Chris, awesome. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks, Russ.
Thank you very much. It was an honor.